What is up, everybody? Welcome to the Bucky Report on a Friday free-for-all here. We're going to do a little recruiting talk. We will dive into some of the quarterbacks in the 2026 class. Who is the guy that I think is the one that the Badgers should go after? We'll dive into that, and we'll get into some of your questions going forward here.
Welcome to the Bucky Report, your destination for all things Wisconsin Badgers. Authentic takes.
Oh my God.
Game analysis.
Touchdown Badgers! Ring one up!
And discussion from the fan perspective.
Woo-hoo!
Thanks for joining us and on Wisconsin.
What's up, everybody? I was jonesing for a show. It's been a little while since we've done one, so I figured I'd reach out to you guys and see if anyone wanted to talk a little football, a little recruiting here on a Friday night. Looking for something to fill up my night and just talk some sports. So let's see what you guys have to talk about here. One of the things that I wanted to dive into, I've been taking a look at the quarterbacks that Wisconsin has been linked to over the last month and a half or so. Kind of diving into them, the guys that I think are the most likely, and I will put the links on them in terms of guys that, from the huddle film standpoint, you can take a look at and kind of get a feel for yourself. The three guys that I have listed that I'm going to talk about are Peyton Falzone, Ryan Hopkins, and Brody McWhorter. I don't know if any of you guys have checked any of them out. I like all three of them athletically. From a passing standpoint, we'll dive into them. I'll break them down here real quick. First guy, Peyton Falzone. If you're looking for a chart of physical tools you want a quarterback to have, the guy has basically everything you could ask for. He's got a huge frame. He's 6'5". I believe he's a little over 200. He is a deer running the football. He's got a huge arm. But I find myself watching his film and seeing a lot of backyard football. There's a little Johnny Manziel to his game that I'm not a huge fan of. And the reason why I'm not a huge fan of it is because that doesn't play in college football unless you're Johnny Manziel. It's really hard to work out of system and have things go positively. He's a guy that tends to run around a little bit and then just fling it up when he sees somebody that's open. And that gives me questions regarding him as to whether he can process quickly enough to be able to read and react and throw with anticipation. I really like the tools. I just wish I had a better feel for what he actually is in terms of where he is in terms of his growth. He's a guy that I think if it all clicks, you're looking at an NFL guy. He's got all the tools. It's just you have no idea until you can see him actually put it together how quickly he's going to be able to get rid of the football and can he get it out on time and with anticipation. The next guy I'll talk about is Brody McWhorter. The kid is not – out of the three, he's probably has the least athleticism, and he's no slouch there himself. I don't think he has quite the arm of the other two guys. I really like him from the perspective of watching him throw the football, and he seems to have a really good idea of where he's going with the ball as soon as the ball is snapped. That's something that kind of gives you an idea. He has an understanding, at least what he's looking at pre-snap in terms of what the defense is showing him. I have not seen a ton of arm out of him, and I wish that's something I'm going to be looking for on his senior film to see how big the arm actually is. He does not throw a ton of deep balls on his huddle. I'm looking forward to seeing more from him and finding out just how good the arm is. He's a 4'9" kid listed on his huddle in terms of speed. Peyton Falzone was a 4'5" kid, I believe 4'5", and he said he's with the catapult has gotten up to 22.3, which anyone that knows that type of speed, that's big time for a quarterback. That would be probably one of the top 5 speeds that a Wisconsin player in general would have hit. In terms of the guy who I'm highest on out of this group, it's Ryan Hopkins. I watched his film. He's a 4.58 kid. He's run a 10.92 100. He's a track kid too. So he's got legit speed. Kid can really run. He's 6'3", 6'4". he needs to really pack on some weight. I think he's only like 185, 190 at this point. He's probably going to have to put on 25 pounds of weight to really get to where you're comfortable with his frame. But I think the arm is there. I think he's actually got really good ball placement. If you watch his film in the huddle, there's a couple of throws where you watch it and you're just like, this kid has a tendency to really put the ball where nobody else is going to get it but the receiver. And that's something that isn't, when you watch the film on a lot of these kids, it's something that's a really undervalued skill when you see people just watching some of these kids sling the ball over the place. Because the first thing I watched on Falzone was like the first 10 passes he has are all 40 yards plus, and they're all to receivers that have 3 yards on their defender. And I don't know about you, but that situation takes place maybe 3-4 times an entire season for a college quarterback. There's very rarely that you're going to throw a deep ball that's going to be uncontested, or at least that you're going to have that type of open space with a receiver. And those are the easy reads. Like if you're a quarterback, you see that guy get that first couple of steps, you know that he's got his man beat. You know you're going with the ball there. I need to see the guy who you can't quite see it, but you know what he's running for his route and that he's got the right positioning on a defender, that the second he makes his break, he's going to have a step. And that step may only be there for a second or two. So when I watch this, Hopkins is the guy, if you watch his film, really adept at throwing back shoulder. I don't think his receivers are super gifted in terms of a ton of long speed or ability to break open because he's just not throwing to a lot of guys that are wide open down the field. He seems to be able to read the defense fairly well and get rid of the ball quickly. And when I watch him, his first 2 or 3 beats are always him surveying the field before he decides to take off and run. But the kid can really run once he gets some freedom and nothing's there. So he's a kid. Once again, any one of these guys I think is more than athletic than what we've seen in the past for Wisconsin. Every single one of these guys, in my opinion, is capable of being a step up from what we're used to. I think the top 2 guys I would have would be Hopkins and then probably Falzone, and I would like to see if Falzone can get it together mentally. Once again, Brody McWhorter is not a bad quarterback by any means. I think probably from a mental standpoint, I'd probably have him number 2. But I just think I have some questions there about how big the arm is. And, he's a step behind the other guys in terms of mobility. Tyler Strieber, I'm going to throw up this question from you. What's the ideal QB type for Grimes' offense versus Longo? Being honest, in terms of quarterbacks, Grimes is very similar to what I think Luke Fickell ideally wants, which is a quarterback that is very mobile, but also has you want somebody that has physical tools. We saw it this last cycle with Smith coming in, who I absolutely love his film. I actually thought he threw really well with anticipation in college. I think that he is a guy who is capable of really running with the football and buying himself some time to get rid of it if things aren't there. The one thing you need to know about Wisconsin's offense, we don't have Ohio State's receivers. They're capable of getting open, but if things aren't perfect, sometimes you need somebody that can buy you an extra second or two to find that guy if things aren't open off the initial sequence. And that's where I think you want a guy like Smith. That's where I think you want a guy like Hopkins, Falzone, McWhorter in this class. All those guys are capable of buying you a couple extra seconds and worst case, taking off and getting you 10 yards if it's there, if the defenders are dropping. So from that stance, I think Grimes fits this well. If you look at some of the guys that he had at Baylor, they were very mobile. You look at the guys that at BYU, they could all run. So you're looking at a guy who wants somebody who's very, very athletic, mobile, I don't know if he's a guy who's looking for a quarterback that has an absolute cannon. Then again, you're not going to find an offensive coordinator who's going to say, I want a guy who won't take the extra arm. So I don't think, looking at the guys that they've targeted this cycle, that they're super hung up on having a big time arm, but I think they are hung up on the ability that you need to have enough arm, and you can't be a guy who has to sit in the pocket, because we just don't typically get the receiver talent to be able to say, this guy's going to get open. This guy's an automatic open. I can just feed him the whole time. Yeah, Eric or Doc coming on here. He needs quicker reads, not to fault with his legs, especially at the next level. So you look at some of these guys that the Badgers have had. You had a guy like Braden Locke and what we've had from Wisconsin in the past. We haven't had anybody that really fits what I would look at least from my perspective, in terms of quarterbacks that personally I would ideally go for at Wisconsin. We saw with Russell Wilson, anyone who followed the team, obviously, you guys, we've all been fans. That is the pinnacle of what you can do in this offense with a quarterback that can move like that. We saw it somewhat last year at Kansas when he had Jalen Daniels at quarterback. He was not afraid to run the speed option and stuff like that with his quarterback there. And what happens when you have an offense that has that much movement and motion and guys going like that are so flexible and can be used in so many different, have so much versatility, like what they're going to probably do with Acker this year, you end up having situations where the defense is kind of caught in flux because they have guys that they're not necessarily a perfect fit for what they want to do. Couple of the plays that I watched, some of the things that people used to love about Paul Chryst, he would run tight end screens coming across the middle. That's going to be coming back. That was something that Kansas did last year. Tunnel screens are probably going to be happening a lot more. I've seen plays in the Grimes offense where he'll go trips right. He'll throw the tight end out there and he'll run crossers off of that or mesh with that and basically use him almost as like a pick man in basketball. When you have a body that's that big, you get Kozio out there as a guy who can just get in the way of a defender. It's a big difference having a guy who's 6'6", 6'7", and 250 versus a guy who's 6'1" and maybe 200. Jet sweeps, Jeff Olson will definitely be a factor in this offense. He will use that both as window dressing to open up runs up the middle. He will do pop passes off of that. Grimes does a lot of the things. Like when I brought it up when we've talked about it in the past, I think it's very Green Bay Packers centric in terms of the type of offense that it is. It's got a lot of creativity in it. He finds some really interesting ways to make the defense think. It's not like what we saw necessarily last year with Longo, where it was he didn't run a ton of motion, and I think there was a lot more option. This is going to be a little bit more rigid of a offensive philosophy, but I actually think that that's something better for this team because I think they really struggled with that level of freedom and actually being able to maximize what they wanted to do. And I question going forward with the way college football is right now, how easy it's going to be to do that unless you can get a QB and receiver together for extensive time, multiple years in the system to maximize what they're capable of. It's one of the things when people started talking about Longo's system and saying, well, if you have the right athletes in it, you can make it work. You can until you start getting to, like, if we're talking playoff level football, that offense isn't going to work against Ohio State. They have all the athletes in the world to throw at the guys that you're telling to go out there and run around. They're going to be better than what you have. So even if you get better athletes in this offense, the Longo offense had a somewhat defined ceiling by the fact that at some point you were going to have to mentally start attacking teams to get the advantage. What I will say about this, one thing I am extremely excited for this coming season, I think offensive line play is going to be, I think we're in for a surprise for what I expect from the offensive line play, just in terms of what Grimes' offense entails in terms of the athletes that are in that room. Tyler Strieber, does the success of Billy this year impact if guys want to come here? I think that truly comes down to if Billy has a plus season. And what I mean by plus season is in terms of being able to really show out in this offense, you're probably talking about if it's going to bring guys in, he's probably going to have a Russell Wilson type season. And that doesn't necessarily mean he matches that. But if you're talking about the type of season that draws that type of attention in college football right now, Wisconsin's probably going to have to average 35 plus a game. They're going to have to run the football really well, and you're probably going to need to have Billy go for 3,000 plus low 30 touchdowns with a decent and keeping the turnovers down. But I don't know how effective of a recruiting tool it is with how inflated QB stats are now. Like looking at Russell Wilson's season, it was incredible in terms of efficiency, but from a touchdown standpoint, I don't think that it would really move the needle in terms of nationally unless Wisconsin just has a extremely impressive season overall. There's not a zero chance of that. It's a very difficult schedule this year, but the offense would have to take a massive step. Do I think that they're capable of taking a sizable step this year? I absolutely do, but we're kind of in a prove it year for Fickell here. And what I mean by that is I got to ask the question at the beginning, why Ryan Wiley said that he's out on Fickell. My perspective on that, yeah, if the board of regents, he was saying about the automatic extension. Now that happens for all of our coaches, regardless. As long as you're still hired, that's going to happen. What I will say is the bigger picture look at that, something like that from within the program is going to be how does it affect the buyout? So I'm not talking about Fickell one way or the other about whether you're going to get rid of him or keep him or whatever after the season, but it doesn't matter if they're extending years if the buyout's not changing with it. If that's staying the same, then yeah, it's a problem. If it's not and it continues to reduce, then at that point, what does it matter if you're adding years on there? They don't cost anything because you're not paying that money out. I personally think the team takes a step this year. I think there's a chance that the offense looks significantly better. That's just because I believe in Grimes' scheme a lot more. I just think it mentally puts a lot on a defender's plate that I don't think we were doing last year. I think we saw in the Iowa game how little Longo's offense affected that defense. I think they came downhill at us, and I don't think they were afraid of us at all. And they just bottled us up and destroyed us in that game. And I just don't think you can do that against a Grimes offense. There's so many moving parts and so much deception involved in it that I think it's going to be really hard for teams that are trying to just play downhill and that free. There's too much second guessing in it to just play that loose. Now, it doesn't mean we beat a team like Iowa just because the offense is better. What it does mean is that I don't see them just coming downhill and dominating us like they did last year. Because I felt like there were significant problems. Like one of the things I touted last year, I thought the run scheme was really rudimentary for the most part. And I don't think teams that the thinking man teams didn't struggle with it. Minnesota and Iowa had no problem dealing with Longo's run game. And that is, given that we didn't have much of a passing game, you're kind of stuck at that point. I do think you have multiple weapons this year, though, for the offense to be more effective, though, overall. Koziel is going to be a big deal for this team. I think that he's going to be your safety valve for the bulk of this season, and I think Billy is capable of buying enough time to find him for 5, 6, 7 yards if you have a third and medium to be able to give him time to get open. He's athletic enough, and I think that he's capable of, with the catch radius that he has, to be able to get open and find some openings for things. And keep asking questions, guys. If there's anybody you want to talk about in particular, if there's anything regarding the program you want to talk about, we'll dive into it. I don't know how late we're going to go, but I'm more than willing to discuss whatever you guys want to. Jason Gelden here. It's going to be nice to have some 2nd and 6s this season rather than 2nd and 11s. Yeah, I think one of the things you're going to see overall, I really think that offensively, the way that this run scheme is going to work, and I really liked the scheme that Kansas was running even prior to Grimes, but I think that it's really conducive to putting the defense into some tough spots and making them just hesitate just enough where those runs that should be 2 yards turn into 4 or 5. And I think that's a big deal for this team going forward this year. Like if Jones and Dupree can be positive players in terms of what we want to do, I think that the offense will massively be upgraded in the passing game by just simply being able to be more of a run threat in that regard. And I actually think that the offensive line is going to be better. I like the athletes better that are in the group now. And I don't think we performed to the level. If we're going to go strictly off recruiting, I don't think that prior group from the guys that were left from most of the Fick years, or not Fickle, Chris years, I just don't think they performed to the level you expected. There's a lot of top shelf, like mid 4-star, 5-star guys, and there's multiple reasons for that. A lot of it is the turnover that was consistently happening within the program. You had offensive line coaches getting swapped out. One of the big deals of this offseason is the fact that you have Blazek coming back for a second year in a row, which gives this offensive line a ton of time to gel under the techniques that he's actually teaching and gives these guys an opportunity to get comfortable in what they're actually going to do. I actually think the way that the Grimes scheme works is probably going to be more conducive to them playing at a high level too, which will probably help them overall. But yeah, athletically, you guys have heard me talk nonstop about how I'm really high on the group as a whole. I think that the last 2 classes have been incredible in terms of the recruiting the offensive line. I really like the group there. I expect the guy I'm going to say that I'm super high on, obviously, we all love Haywood. Doc, that's a shout out to you. Emerson Mandel is my other guy. I've touted him since I first watched his film. I think if you put him at guard, I think this year he's going to absolutely steamroll people on the interior. Jeff Olson here. We going 3 or 4 down linemen. My personal perspective on this, I have no insight on this. I haven't seen anything at this point. I really think what we're going to see this year is going to be closer to a 4-2-5. I think you're going to have 3 down linemen with a stand-up 4, and I think that guy is going to be a big body. I think it's going to be somebody that's 250 plus. I think there's going to be some smaller guys like Clayton that are going to be put out there as more of a pass rush specialist. But I think it's going to be really interesting where they go with this. That room is stocked now, and I have been complaining about the defensive line room for probably 3 years now. I was complaining about it back when Chris was still coach because they weren't recruiting remotely enough bodies, in my opinion, during that time. It's been the weakness of this program. It's why when people talk about Leonard being the coach, that I'm kind of like, I don't think you guys understand some of these problems were happening no matter who took over, unless they just had an in to get 4 or 5 high caliber defensive linemen or front 7 guys. Wisconsin had like 0 bodies. And then they, not only that, but they had some injuries, and they had the guys who were solid but unspectacular defensive players ended up transferring out. Now, I don't think those guys substantially changed the defense, even if Jimmy's here. Like, we would add a very mediocre defensive line the last couple of years. People forget that we lost Herbig and Benton after Chris left. That was part of the reason why the defense was still not a train wreck when Leonard took over for the remainder of what he had. But there's significant problems that were there in terms of the bodies that they had in terms of size. I don't think that some of the guys that they tried to move into that position were kind of square pegs into a round hole. And there were guys that I just expected to be better than they were. I still don't understand how Bowlers was not a star here. I watched his high school film and I'm like, this guy should have been a monster off the edge. But I think one thing you need to remember, a lot of these kids were dominant in high school because physically there was no one that could stand up to them. And when you get to the college level, it's the first time you see somebody standing across from you that's physically on the same level as you. And you find out very quickly, are you willing to do the dirty work and do the fighting that is required for you to now be able to beat that guy across from you? And that's why you see guys that are big time athletes that flame out. They either don't have it mentally or they don't want to put the work in or work hard enough on the field. That's not to call out Bowlers. I mean, I'm sure he practiced hard and did everything he could. He wasn't productive here. But overall, that's the problem with the defense kind of in general. There's not really a guy. When we start looking at guys with 2.5 sacks and saying like this guy's a huge loss, that's telling you all you need to know about how the depth in that defensive line room, in my opinion. I'm not saying we should be getting guys that are going to have 6-7 sacks at that, but we didn't have anyone that was truly that level of disruptive since Benton. I said when he came into the draft that he was a guy that probably should have been a fringe first rounder, and he's been highly productive in the NFL so far. What I will say, I do expect the defense to be better this year, if no other reason, because I think the parts in general are just a much better fit for what we're trying to do. I have been critical of Tressel. We'll see how he is this season. We'll see if better talent makes him look better from a defensive coordinator standpoint. What I'll say is going forward, there is zero reason that Wisconsin, being a Power 4 team, should ever be at the bottom in terms of tackles for loss, and they should never be over 100 for sacks. So the way I look at it is you're kind of on notice at this point, because not only was the defense not great, if you want to just look at how it held up in terms of being able to stop teams when we need them to, they weren't really great from the analytics either. You can probably drag some stats out that make them look good and prop them up. But when you're not disruptive, the way I look at it is some of these teams could have gotten far more aggressive against us and just didn't need to, because the offense wasn't good this last year. So now you suddenly can just kind of grind teams out. Like you could grind Wisconsin out last year because you knew the offense wasn't going to hurt you. Going forward this year, I'm hopeful that Grimes gets us to the point where at least we make teams have to work for it a little bit more, which should take some of the pressure and hopefully make things easier for the defense. If the offense can actually score a little bit, maybe the other team's offense has to rely on throwing the football a little bit more. You get games against Iowa where if you can have the potential to jump up a little bit, if the offense is a little bit more creative and well-rounded and are capable of putting some points on the field, maybe you get the opportunity to get the defense into some favorable situations because teams can't just run the football on them all the time. Michael Wagner, thoughts on the Fickle extinction? What was the Fickle extinction? Did I miss something here? Oh, extension. Okay. Yeah, I don't think it means a whole lot. I personally want to see him. Like I said to start this show, I think Fickle's an improve it year. I think the way you need to look at it from what we've seen so far in these first 2 years, he's in trouble if it looks like it has the last 2 years. He's got to show some improvement. He's got to show like this is coming together a little bit for it to be an opportunity for the program to get some belief back in him. I'm not saying what that means in terms of record, but I think you need to have a season where people look at it and be like, we're headed in the right direction. This looks like it's cohesive. The coaching staff seems to be working well together. You know, there's plenty of room for growth. I think that's the biggest thing I take away from this, from what we've seen the last couple of years, is when you look at this team, we haven't been great the last couple of years, but I don't think we've necessarily hit what the team was capable of in terms of talent that they had. There's some games that we lost this last year that we had no business, at least not being competitive in. Iowa and Minnesota are prime examples. Nebraska is a prime example of that. I don't think those teams were significantly more talented than us. I think they just played a lot better and were understood what they were required to do across the board. I do think offensively we will, like I said, take a big step this year. What that means in terms of points per game, I think will just be a more dangerous offense. In all honesty, I think there is a solid chance here that Billy has a good season. No matter what, him being on the field, he's a better quarterback than Braden Locke, and he proved that last year. And he will now have an offensive line that is not going to get him killed like he was at Maryland all last season. My big question, honestly, with him, biggest one, because I think he does have some really nice physical tools. How much damage did that do to him having that horrific offensive line last year? Is he going to struggle with – is he going to see ghosts out there? Like, is he going to have that clock in his head where he's back there for 2 seconds and now he starts freaking out because he's waiting for somebody to hit him? It'll be really interesting to see how that plays out. Alabama will obviously be a huge game for him early in the season to see how he's going to handle that. Um, I'm very curious to see what ends up happening in that regard. I think he's going to surprise us. I honestly think I'm not going to say that I think he's going to be a top quarterback in the Big Ten. I think he's capable of being in the middle of the pack for sure. And I think that he's going to be able to, with this run game, he's going to have enough help that he's going to be able to make some good decisions. I don't think he's going to have too much put on his plate where he's going to have to try and do too much. I would agree. I've seen several people say swagger, moxie. He definitely has some of that. I actually said I think that this quarterback room probably has the most swagger that I've seen from a quarterback room. As somebody who grew up playing a lot of baseball, it reminds me of just the baseball field and seeing guys talk a bunch of crap all the time. And I like seeing that in the quarterback room. I like that energy. I like a little bit of cocky. I think you need to have the athletes in the room to be able to have a little bit of it. And I think that the guys athletically that are in that room right now, I like all of them. Badger and Bournemouth fan. Better year, Dupree or Jones? I think we may have to look at this in terms of what signifies the better, or what signifies a better year. Dupree's going to be the more versatile player. I think there's going to be times we're going to see both of them on the field. I think you're ridiculous if you don't. I will say this: it would not shock me to see us do some wildcat and see us do some interesting things with this. If you paid attention to Kansas, they had times last year where they would shift. They would put in the wildcat and they'd have Jalen Daniels out on the field at running back. They'd have the ball snapped to Devin Neal. He'd hand it off to Jalen Daniels, and they would have the tight end come across. And you'd crack a guy, and then he would come across and kind of leak out. And that's when you talk about some of the interesting things that Grimes does. Those are plays that are really hard for a defense to be able to deal with. Just the fact that if you have a quarterback that has mobility and you have a running back that's capable of running some wildcat, I wouldn't be shocked to see, if they trust Dupree to handle the football, to have him and Jones out there at the same time and one of those guys be the one to take the snap and just do some interesting things, because I think that level of speed out there is kind of scary. Bo Dragon, I don't know if Jones is necessarily more explosive. I think people are underselling the speed that Dupree has. I don't think he had a lot of situations to really get into open space and fly, but he can run. I would guess they're probably fairly close. It'll be interesting to see if we ever get to see 40 times for the two of them. But I think both of those guys are capable of doing some things. Dupree's the far shiftier of the two. He's the far scarier player, in my opinion, in open space, because he's much more adept at being able to make somebody miss. Jones is much more of a one-cut guy. I think straight line, he might be slightly quicker. In a tight space, you're probably going to have Dupree's the guy that's going to be able to make somebody miss and find that extra little bit of yardage. I really like both backs, though. I think there's a chance that we could see both of them go for 800-900 yards. And in all honesty, in a Grimes offense, if you look at it last year, Kansas ran for like 2,500 yards. I don't think we're going to see the quarterback go for like 400 or whatever Jalen Daniels did last year. But it wouldn't surprise me to see us get 200 yards and then like 1,100 yards out of one back and 800 out of the other. I just think that offensively they're going to run the football. It's going to be a big part of this offense. It's going to be based off of that. But you're also going to see an offense where we take a lot of deep shots because Grimes is a big believer in attacking downfield. Jason Geldon, longest touchdown from scrimmage this season with our backs. I think we're probably at some point going to see a 40 or 50 yarder for sure. I don't know who that's going to be. If I'm going to take a guess, I'll go big on this. I'll say somebody's going to get a 60 yarder. I'm not sure which guy that's going to be. I think both of them are capable of housing it if they get into open space. Either one of them is a threat. These are two really good backs that were just not in a great ecosystem last year, and we're young guys. They're going to look significantly better now that they've adjusted to the college speed, and they understand their reads at running back now that they have to actually really understand their blocking scheme and being able to see where the open space should be showing when they're out there, especially now in an offense that is more geared towards them being productive. This offensive system is going to help them a ton. If you look at last year's Kansas team, every single back was 5.8 yards per carry or more. For perspective, I think the highest guy for Wisconsin was like 4.5. That was outside. That had major carries. You could say it's Yak at his 8 yards. Listen, I love people that are high on him. That there is some phantom yardage there when you look at that. When you have a guy that breaks a couple of big runs, it's hard to look at a player and quantify what that's going to be stretched out over additional carries. And especially when a lot of it was against some of our bad teams that we played early. Now, that doesn't mean that I don't think that he has a place in this offense. I think he'll get probably more run than he did last year for sure. I just don't think he's quite the back that some people have in their eyes. If I was going to take a guess at how the carries are going to play out this year, top couple backs are probably going to be around 200, 250, and then maybe you have somebody like Yakimelli that's got an extra 130, 140. It'll be really interesting to see. Like I could see them really spreading this out and deciding who's the best fit for what they want to do in a given situation. Starting 3 wide receivers, I can tell you 2 of them are going to be Vinny and Tretch. The third guy will be really interesting. It could be Hamper, it could be Ballard. There's the kid from Boston College. Who knows with him? He might have an opportunity to jump into this. We don't really know what he was last year because obviously they knew something ahead of all of us. So he wasn't playing and he wasn't practicing really. So honestly, I don't know what to make of him in terms of what we're looking at for the wide receiver room for this year. And there's a couple other guys who are going to get a new lease on life under a new coach. Because I think Grimes does value things far differently than what Longo did. I kind of made the comment in terms of wide receivers that I thought the philosophy is going to change a little bit at wide receiver. I wouldn't be shocked to see Grimes look at it more of guys who are interchangeable, a little bit closer to what Chris and them did back in the day, which was we're going to have guys that are capable of playing multiple spots. I think they're going to want guys that are capable of playing on the outside and in the slot. So I think the slot receivers are going to get bigger. We're going to probably see guys that are closer to that 5'11" range, maybe 190, 195 range, rather than guys who are going to be 5'9", 5'10", 170, 180. I just don't think they want those undersized guys. Number one, because I do think they're going to value blocking in the run game a lot more than what we have in the past. Well, Hannah, thinking that Ballard may be a little bit of a steal for us. He's a lottery ticket to me. I think Ballard has a chance. The raw physical tools are there. I need to see what he can do, but he's a guy who I think is definitely capable of getting open. If he can catch the football and he can run the routes that he's supposed to, we'll see what happens there. But he's a guy who has all the upside in the world, and maybe a change of venue gives him an opportunity to show out, kind of like, somebody, John Tanjay being talked about in the chat. Maybe that's what happens with Ballard. Maybe the change of scenery for him, getting an opportunity to take a bigger place out on the field. Maybe he is a guy who really shows out now that he gets an opportunity and, doesn't get 10 snaps a game or less than that even. And Bo Dragon, Tanjay plays with more passion than the entire defensive line and linebackers did. I just think that last year, if you want to take a look at last year's defense, they weren't a fit. Like some of those guys wanted to play hard and they just weren't capable. And I don't know what was being totally asked of all the defensive, especially our outside linebackers. I don't know how often they were turned loose just to rush the quarterback. But that's a problem. You have to have guys there has to be somebody on the field that is attacking. So when you take a look at the defensive line and linebackers, I don't know who the designated guys are going to be. I will say if we're running a 4-2-5, it is absolutely going to be that stand-up edge. It's probably going to be Riger, and I actually think that if he's healthy, you're potentially looking at an NFL guy on the edge. Last time he saw the field, he had 6 sacks and he had a bum knee when he was doing that. And he's a guy that is long and athletic and has some really good burst off the edge. It'll be interesting to see what the rotation is on that outside, because there are a couple of guys who I think deserve some opportunity to hopefully get out on the field and show some of that early. And I think some guys that are going to have to if you want to keep them. But I do think that whatever happens on defense, you need to play whoever's capable. Well, Hannah, I'm a big believer in bringing pressure. Absolutely. My perspective on defense and college football is that the bulk of college football quarterbacks, if you get any type of pressure on them, they just melt down. You're far better off sending the house at them and making them uncomfortable, because they'll start sailing throws and just making mistakes that if you give them time, they're not going to make. If you sit back and wait on these guys, most of them have been playing 7 versus 7 their whole life and been chewing it up. You need to be able to get pressure on them and make them uncomfortable and move off their spots. And when you do that, they typically will make mistakes or turn the ball over. I think that that's something that you're really looking forward to. I personally think that we're going to see more of that this year. I think you have to. I'm hoping that Tommy Turbo gets out there and gets to show out. I'm hoping Clayton gets an opportunity, and at least in some pass rush sets to come out there and attack downhill. There's a couple of guys. Rajiv in the chat showing out. Yeah, Rajiv, we wish you were here too, man. They can only listen to me drone on for so long. It's not easy doing this. But apparently I like listening to myself talk. But yeah, we're going to – unless you guys have some more questions, I'm probably going to shut her down soon, guys. But feel free to ask anything. Yeah, Bo Dragon, I'm not going to argue schematics on this. Like, we did a bad job of being able to try and create problems. And I feel like it's a cop-out to say that we didn't have the athletes to be able to get things done, because let's be honest, every one of those guys on that defensive side of the football was a better athlete than the teams that we played in those first 2 games. And we weren't getting pressure and getting disruptive plays in either of those 2 games either. So it's, in my opinion, that's total nonsense to an extent. I'm not saying that the guys were capable of making plays against the better teams that we played, but I absolutely don't believe that they were just such inept athletes that they were incapable of not being able to bring pressure with some level of schematic advantage. Michael Wagner, thoughts on tomorrow's game? Wisconsin playing Oregon tomorrow. I think Wisconsin's going to win. I think Wisconsin has proven that they struggle less with athletes this year than they have in the past. And I think they're so efficient offensively that they're going to take advantage of Oregon's mistakes. I just don't think Oregon can be efficient enough with them to stay with them offensively. I actually think it's going to be a game that probably gets a little bit ugly. And by ugly, I mean 15 points. I think Wisconsin's just a better team. So I'd be shocked if they don't kind of grind them down until they're up late early and kind of roll at the end. We were last in Bo Dragon. We were last in tackles for loss. We had the worst talent in college. I don't believe we had the worst talent in college football last year. I think some of it was misused. I don't like the scheme that we run right now on defense. I'll be quite honest. I'm really looking forward to see what we see in spring heading forward. But I think it's a cop-out to say that it was all talent, because if that was, I don't think we were starting an FCS defense out there. And we've seen some FCS teams look better than what we saw last year. So we'll see. Badger and Bournemouth, your take on 4 college football, 4 teams in Big Ten and SEC. I'm going to be totally honest with this. I think I don't want the group of 5 to just be completely pulled out of this, but I mean, what are we doing with that? What is the end game to a group of 5 team being entered into the playoff? They win one game and they become a great Cinderella story for winning that one game. It played out exactly how I expected it to this season. If you put them in a playoff game, it's not like a bowl game. So I'm just going to say that right off the bat. When you put a team like that into a game like that, they're going to come out gunning and they're going to come out looking to blow that team off the field. And what I will say is they need to massively change how they seeded last year, because I thought it was total garbage the way Oregon got set up. They had no business playing Ohio State in the second round. That was just poor seeding by everything, especially when you look at what Penn State had to go through to get there. The third best team from the Big Ten ends up having the easiest route to get through. Like, that's ridiculous. Do I think we can get a 1 seed in basketball? From Michael Wagner. I think the only way you are going to make it into a 1 seed as Wisconsin is you win out through the tournament, meaning we cannot lose a game now through all the way through the Big Ten tournament. And I think we probably need somebody to cough up a game. But if we win out, I think they'll have enough impressive wins down that last little bit to probably get themselves there. It's probably going to be like the 4th one, but honestly, does it matter? Like, if you get that, that's tremendous. And I think we'd all take that, given that none of us thought that was an opportunity. Wisconsin has a chance. Like, I don't think people understand. And I think when we watch SEC games, I think people get lost a little bit watching some of those teams play with how loose they are with everything to an extent. Those teams are going to look a little bit weaker when they get involved in the NCAA tournament. I think they're going to struggle a little bit more. It's one of the things we talked about with the Big Ten, why I've said I haven't liked the Big Ten over the last few years, is that when you watch them, the Big Ten is so reliant on physical play and grinding each other down that they don't understand when you get into the NCAA tournament that that's not the way they officiate the game. The officials in the Big Ten get somewhat numb to it because they're seeing it every single game. What ends up happening when you get into the NCAA tournament is you end up drawing a bunch of fouls early, or you get into situations where you face some teams that are far more free-flowing, and they end up causing problems for you because you get behind or they get hot from 3, and suddenly you get a team that's playing with house money and has confidence now that you can't just sit on and defend and play pack line or whatever on them to keep them and try to win a game, 64-50. You want to be able to score with anybody. Like, if, in my opinion, you need to be able to play probably a top 50 defensive team, and you need to be ideally top 25 or so offensively if you want to be a team that's going to make a decent run in the tournament. I think Wisconsin's hitting both those metrics. And I think offensively, Wisconsin is a super scary team because they have players that are just really efficient. So it'll be interesting to see what happens the remainder of the season. They can beat anybody, but we really need Michigan to cough up a couple of games, because right now it's going to be hard for us to get into that number, get towards the top with Michigan continuing to win. See, teams like Duke are hard to read. Bo Dragon talking about them. I think they have incredible individual talent. I think we need to see what they can do when they get pushed by teams that are really well drilled and are good. I don't know how good the ACC is this year. So we'll have to take a look at that and see if Duke is really a good team or if it's just kind of more of a down year so their young players look better than what they are. It'll be really interesting to see how this all plays out. I will say this. I think that some of the metrics that we're seeing, like the FPI and stuff like that from ESPN, are just garbage. The college basketball one for ESPN is just, they completely just are crapping on the Big Ten. And I actually think the Big Ten is solid this year. I actually think they're going to play pretty well in the tournament. I don't think we have a team like Purdue last year that can go in and just kind of bash their way through. But I do think that Wisconsin has an opportunity to make a run. I am afraid of what's going to happen if we play a team that has an interior guy who's capable of being really physical with us. But we'll see what happens, because if that guy is really physical with us, they also need to have people that are capable of scoring on the outside so that we don't just pack it in and try to take him away. I don't know how many teams there are that are capable of doing that. And a lot of it will come down to how things are seeded. And quite honestly, if Wisconsin is shooting well from the outside, it doesn't matter. There aren't many teams that are going to be able to play with us if we're really able to shoot it well from the outside, and Tanjay and Blackwell are efficient. Michigan is one of the few who has two guys capable of playing off of each other that can be problems, and their guards are also pretty solid. All right. Well, if you guys don't have anything else, I'm going to go ahead and take off. I'm going to spend some time with the kiddo, and hopefully we get a big win tomorrow for the Oregon game. Rajiv and I will be back on Sunday, so we'll talk some more stuff. We'll probably talk about Oregon game and dive into some other stuff. Thanks for hanging out with me, guys. You guys have a good night.
Thank you for listening. If you enjoy the show, subscribe to our YouTube channel at The Bucky Report or The Bucky Report Podcast from wherever you get your content. Until next time, on Wisconsin.